Rockhopper here. This is David. You first met David in my video about homesteading in the Canadian wilderness, where he was working on an addition to his house, a house that started out as a chicken coop and progressed to a horse barn before he altered it to create his residence. I found David's childhood to be fascinating. He grew up in a manner that no longer exists, on a floating logging camp. He believes his early years prepared him for life as a homesteader. He's going to share some of his life with you now. So Dave, from what you were telling me about your childhood, I think a lot of that prepared you for living in the bush up here?
Yeah, I was 13 when we moved up to a floating logging camp on the BC coast. And that was up about 300 miles north of Vancouver, north end of Vancouver Island. The only access was by boater plane. All the transportation there was boater plane. There were no cars. So remote. The camp, I got a picture here I can show you if you like.
Sure.
That's the picture of camp.
That's the floating logging camp.
That's the floating logging camp.
And you went there when you were how old? 13. And you actually were working there at that age?
It was just part of life there. I and the other kids, on weekends, we'd go and have out logging, with the crew. You'd never get away with that now. And that's a tragedy, because I think that was one of the best experiences for me as a kid growing up, is actually to be out there working and logging and making money. At that time, $5 a day when we started. 1957, that was pretty good. We initially did, blowing the signals. It was all high lead logging. High lead logging being that there's no cats or equipment like that. Everything was by cables and pulling the logs down from the mountain and down to the ocean and booming them up down there. It was a great experience, and living in the wilderness, it's where I'm at now. I learned to love the wilderness.
And before you went to the floating logging camp, where did you live?
I had lived in Kelowna, which is in the Okanagan of BC, southern BC. From the time I was 6 months old until 11, and a couple of years in Vancouver when my mother went and took teacher training. Taught for 1 year down there, and then got the invitation to teach up at the floating logging camp. And that's how we ended up there. That was very cool.
So your mother was a teacher on the floating logging camp.
Yeah.
And tell me about the kids in school.
Well, we had kids from the camp, and being the only school for literally hundreds of miles probably, and well, close to that away, we had kids from neighboring camps that would come and board there in our camp so that they could go to school. So there's quite a few kids.
And these kids, could they all swim?
No, but they all had to wear life jackets if they couldn't swim. And the people up there made these life jackets, which were really good. And here's a picture of a group of the kids with their life jackets. And that's my mother, the school teacher, and our dog. And so you see that there's a few of the older kids that don't have life jackets because they could swim. But all the kids that couldn't swim, the minute they were headed out the door, they had to put on a life jacket. It was ingrained. They never even thought of going out without. One of the intriguing things about living up there is that many of the kids there had never seen a horse or a cow, but oh, there's a whale, oh yeah, that's neat, or a seal, or a sea lion, or, a bear, whatever, bear swimming across the bay, a lot of things that for the southern person would be unbelievable was, it was interesting. What's common to the southern kids was not common to these kids. I remember one time when we were going down by boat to Vancouver, and we arrived, remember, a 300-mile trip. We arrived coming down below Lionsgate Bridge, and underneath, and eventually we could see cars on the roads. And one of the little girls, probably about 3 years old, she pointed and said, "Pete boat, Pete boat," looking at the cars thinking they were speedboats. That was her only context for something moving that fast. So yeah, definitely was a different lifestyle, and one that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, and these life jackets, you know, they look fairly old by today's standards. What did they have in them to keep them afloat?
They used kapok, which is still one of the best products you can get as a natural product, and it does not absorb water, and that's what makes it really ideal for a life jacket. The women made those themselves.
Being on a floating logging camp in the middle of nowhere, how did you get supplies?
Well, we had a coastal freighter that would come up every 2 weeks and bring supplies to all the camps along the coast. And they'd meet at Boswell Camp, which was an old fish cannery that had a high enough and big enough dock for the coastal freighter. And everybody in the neighboring camps all met there every 2 weeks, and we'd get all our supplies. We'd order from Vancouver, and they'd be shipped, and you get canned goods and all that. Wouldn't get milk because it wouldn't last, so we had powdered milk. Only things that could survive traveling that long, as well as our mail would come every 2 weeks by boat. That was a big day. We'd all go and meet up at Boswell Camp, come back with our boat, and bring all the supplies to camp, and all the mail would be in one big canvas bag. We'd dump it in the middle of the floor of one of the houses, and we'd be sorting through all the mail. Everybody get their mail.
What about like diesel or anything like that?
That came with a different boat, and I've got a picture of that I can show you. It was a tanker boat. So we'd get our gas, oil, diesel oil, stove oil, all of that, because most of our stoves were using stove oil for heating and for cooking. And all of that would come. We had 1,000 and 500 gallon. We had 500-gallon tanks for some products and 1,000-gallon tank for the diesel. So those were on floats. Go and get a 50-gallon drum, fill it with stove oil, and had to roll it all through over camp and up and over the logs and to the next camp and up and over the next house. And for a 13-year-old, that took all the muscle I had. The coastal freighter, I'll show you a picture of that. The coastal tanker, really. There, he's really loaded. He's got a lot of fuel, oil, and gas and diesel on there now.
Why did you have the camp floating on the water instead of being built on land?
Well, there's two reasons for that, really. One, it would be very hard to find a good level place. The mountains were very steep, going right up from the ocean inlet right up high, and so very few areas where there's good flat ground to build on. The second and probably more important reason is that we would log, and one called a show, when you're logging a certain claim, we'd log one area, and then there might be another claim 20 miles away in another part of the inlet. And so this way they could tow the whole camp from one area to another to always be close to where we were logging. I've got a picture here I can show you of towing camp. And that was a very big event. Would happen maybe every 2 or 3 years that we would actually tow camp. Very slow, long process, even with 3 boats there. I literally rode ahead of the boats with a rowboat to get the picture. So that's how slow we were going. It took many hours to tow the camp from one location to another.
And these pictures that you're showing me, they could be considered historic photos nowadays.
They are. That lifestyle just doesn't exist anymore. Part of what is the history is that they gave quotas to the small loggers, and these were small loggers, small-time loggers, really, relatively. After they gave quotas, the government gave quotas based on their history, then the big companies came in and bought up the quotas from a lot of small guys, and they offered them enough to make it worth retiring. So it really ended a very unique way of life. So I first went out fishing with somebody else, commercial fishing, when I was 14. I bought my own commercial fishing boat when I was 17 and used commercial fishing to put myself through university. Really an opportunity for a young kid.
Well, that's pretty impressive that you had your own fishing boat at the age of 17. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I've got a picture here. That's my fishing boat. The first one that I had, and then I went up from there to a 34-foot boat. It was really a great opportunity. I loved being out on the ocean. The net is 1,200 feet long and could bring it up. It's all, power-driven drum that it rolls up on. Put it up at night with a lantern on the end, or if I'm in the daytime, I had that what we used to call a Scotchman. There, the red ball would go on the end of the net in the daytime, and set it out for a period of time, usually maybe an hour or so, and pick it up and pick out the fish. There's a gill net.
Tell me a fish story, Dave.
One that's kind of interesting is on one occasion I got a shark in my net, and there was no way to cut the shark out of the net without bringing him on board, and I had to power a winch with a drum. So I just powered it right through the rollers and into the boat. I cut it out, but there was no way for me to get the shark out of the boat by myself. Here, I got a picture. So my brother, who was also commercial fishing, I had to phone him on the radio phone and say, come over and give me a hand. And so the two of us were able to get the dead shark out of the net and throw it overboard. The net was a mess. I mean, a massive hole in the net. That brother and I were the two that went up the coast with my mother when she went up teaching. I'm youngest of 8, so there was 6 more that were already attending boarding schools or university or logging, so it was just the two of us left at home. He was at the camp for 1 year, and then I stayed on for another couple of years. I did grade 9 and 10 by correspondence study. And remember, we got our freight and mail every 2 weeks by boat, so by the time I got finished doing a course and sent it down by boat, had it checked to sent to Victoria, and then come back up by boat. It was at least a month old by the time I got it back. Probably more like six weeks or more. That was an adventure too. A lot of kids did not like correspondence, I loved it because I could do it at my own pace in my own way, and I loved to learn. I loved to get the encyclopedia out, and I'd go from one topic to another to another. Yeah, so it was fun.
Well, it sounds like you're your own person, and I think growing up out there on the floating logging camp, amidst the bush, in the middle of nowhere, prepared you in a big way for coming out here and living in the bush.
I would say so, yeah.
What did you do after you left the camp?
I went to university down in California, just north of San Francisco. And that was in the 60s when Haight-Ashbury was alive and well. So definitely quite a culture shock for this young kid from the North Wilderness to Haight-Ashbury and the whole drug scene there, which I didn't participate in at that time. I was an onlooker, but it was definitely a culture shock.
So you saw the whole hippie thing going on.
Oh, yeah.
All around you all the time.
Yeah.
Dave is a talented sculptor, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his work.
This is a not quite finished piece with Polar Bear and being possessive over his kill there. This is also needs just some finishing right in here, but it's a mother nursing a baby and her mother with a cape and so holding both of them. I call this one Held. This is alabaster. One of my favorite pieces is this one here. It's called Withholding. This I have so it can swivel because I feel that it really needs to be looked at from different angles. Here there are two people holding hands and this one reaching out to the other. This figure is holding hands here, but hand behind his back and leaning back somewhat. He's withholding from the other. What that says, I have put into poetry. What we withhold. What we withhold keeps us from full embrace. Our union of intimacy that upholds us and sustains us is sacrificed, fractured, and broken by withholding from our beloved. And our beloved is anyone that we truly care about, including Creator God. One that I'm working on, that's future, but it's a beautiful piece of stone. Very hard stone, and it's got a mud layer naturally on top of it, and my plan is to put a walrus on top of an ice floe. So using the mud layer to carve out a walrus on here, or perhaps two on there, and then they will appear as if they're sitting on an ice floe.
David also likes to do artwork, like this painting right here. I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to give me a like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, this is Rockhopper. I'll see ya.